The desert dust settled over Sarah Hayes' cheeks like a veil of tears as she stood in the doorway of her empty ranch house, watching her husband ride away with nothing but the echo of his final words hanging in the hot Arizona air. "A man needs sons, Sarah. You can't give me that." Arizona Territory, 1875, Sarah slammed the door behind her, refusing to give Thomas the satisfaction of seeing her crumple to the floor. 3 years of marriage, 2 miscarriages, and countless nights of trying to conceive had all led to this moment abandoned on their small homestead 15 miles outside of Copper Springs. At 32, she wasn't young by frontier standards, but she wasn't ready to be discarded like yesterday's bathwater either. The doctor in town had confirmed what Sarah already suspected after her second miscarriage. Her womb was inhospitable, he'd said with clinical detachment. Thomas hadn't spoken a word on the wagon ride home. 1 week later, he was gone, headed to California with most of their savings and all of her dignity. Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and straightened her spine. The ranch wouldn't run itself. 20 acres, 12 cattle, 3 horses, and a vegetable garden that was more dirt than produce wasn't much, but it was hers. Or it would be if she could keep up with the work. 3 weeks after Thomas left, Sarah sat at her kitchen table counting coins by lamplight. The math was unforgiving. Without help, she'd lose the ranch before winter. She'd have to hire someone, but that required money she didn't have. The next morning, Sarah hitched her wagon and headed to Copper Springs. The town had grown considerably in the 5 years since the copper mine opened. Dusty streets bustled with miners, merchants, and the occasional cowboy passing through. Sarah tied her horses outside the general store and straightened her simple blue dress before stepping inside. "Mrs. Hayes," Walter Jenkins nodded from behind the counter. "Wasn't expecting to see you in town today. Need supplies," Sarah said, placing a small list on the counter. "And information." "Thomas still hasn't returned," Walter asked, his voice lowered as he glanced around the store. "He isn't coming back," Sarah said flatly. "I'm running the place myself now," Walter's eyebrows shot up. "That's quite an undertaking for a woman alone. Which is why I need to hire someone. Do you know of any reliable ranch hands looking for work? I can't pay much, but I can offer room and board." Walter scratched his chin. "Most men around here are either at the mine or passing through." "Wait," he snapped his fingers. "There's a fellow been staying at the boarding house these past 2 weeks. Came from Texas way, I heard. Name's Kyle Lawson. Keeps to himself mostly, but Mrs. Dunning says he's polite and pays on time. Might be worth asking." Sarah thanked Walter and collected her modest supplies. The boarding house sat at the edge of town, a 2-story wooden structure with a small front porch where 2 old men played checkers. Inside, a plump woman with graying hair looked up from her ledger. "Mrs. Dunning." "I'm Sarah Hayes from the Double H Ranch outside of town." The woman adjusted her spectacles. "Thomas Hayes' wife, yes, just Sarah Hayes now," she replied. "I'm looking for a man named Kyle Lawson. I understand he's staying here." Mrs. Dunning's lips pursed. "He is." "May I ask your business with him?" "I need help at my ranch. Walter Jenkins suggested he might be looking for work." "He's out back chopping wood for me," Mrs. Dunning said. "Been earning his keep that way. Follow me." Sarah followed the landlady through the house and out the back door. The rhythmic sound of an axe splitting wood grew louder, and then she saw him. Tall and lean, with shoulders broadened by years of physical labor, his shirt clung to his back, darkened with sweat. As they approached, he embedded the axe in a stump and turned. Sarah estimated him to be in his mid-30s. His face was tanned and weathered, with lines around his eyes that deepened when he squinted at the 2 women approaching. A week's worth of stubble covered his jaw, and his dark hair was in need of a trim. What struck Sarah most were his eyes, a clear, pale blue that seemed to take in everything at once. "Mr. Lawson," Mrs. Dunning called. "This lady would like to speak with you." Kyle Lawson wiped his hands on his trousers and nodded. "Madam," Sarah stepped forward. "Mr. Lawson, I'm Sarah Hayes. I own a small ranch outside of town. I find myself in need of help, and I was told you might be looking for work." Kyle studied her for a moment. "Your husband, gone," Sarah said simply. "I can offer room, board, and a small wage." It's not much, but the work is honest. What kind of ranch? He asked. 20 acres, mostly cattle, a few horses, garden patch. Kyle picked up his canteen and took a drink. No offense, madam, but that's a lot for one person to manage, let alone a woman on her own. Sarah lifted her chin. I'm aware of my limitations, Mr. Lawson, which is why I'm here offering you a job. The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. I appreciate the offer, Mrs. Hayes, but I don't plan on staying in Copper Springs much longer. Where are you headed? Sarah asked. North, Montana, maybe. Well, Mr. Lawson, winter's coming in a few months. You could work for me until then, save up some money for your journey. By spring, you'd be better prepared. Kyle considered this, rubbing his jaw. I'll need to see the place first. Relief flooded through Sarah. Of course. My wagon's out front when you're ready. The ride to the ranch was mostly silent. Kyle asked practical questions about the property and livestock, which Sarah answered as thoroughly as she could. As they approached the ranch, Sarah saw it through his eyes, the sagging fence line, overgrown garden, and peeling paint on the modest house. Kyle surveyed the property as they pulled up to the house. Your husband left recently? 3 weeks ago, Sarah replied, climbing down from the wagon. And before that, you had help. It was just the two of us. Kyle frowned, not much to show for it. Sarah felt her face flush with anger. Thomas was more interested in the saloon than fence posts. The cattle are healthy and the horses are sound. That's what matters. Kyle nodded, seeming to respect her directness. Show me around. They walked the property line, checked the cattle, and inspected the barn. Kyle was thorough, asking questions about water sources and predator problems. By the time they returned to the house, the sun was setting. I can offer $10 a month plus room and board, Sarah said, knowing it was a modest sum. Your own cabin is just behind the house. Kyle looked at the small structure, then back at Sarah. 8 cattle won't turn much profit. 12, Sarah corrected. 4 are grazing in the north pasture, still not enough. I know that, Sarah said, frustration edging her voice. But it's what I have to work with. I plan to build the herd if I can keep this place running. Kyle was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the land as twilight settled over it. $15 a month, he finally said. And I want a percentage of any cattle we add to the herd. Sarah hesitated. $10 now and $15 after the first month if your work is satisfactory. 10% of new cattle, Kyle extended his hand. Deal. Sarah felt a small rush of victory as they shook hands. His palm was calloused against hers, his grip firm but not overbearing. You can start tomorrow. The cabin needs airing out, but there are clean linens in the trunk. I'll get my things from town in the morning, Kyle said. I'll prepare supper, Sarah offered. You must be hungry after all that wood chopping. Over a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and coffee, Sarah tried to learn more about her new ranch hand. Where in Texas are you from, Mr. Lawson? Hill country, he replied, and it's Kyle. Mr. Lawson makes me look around for my father. Sarah nodded. Have you always been a cowboy, Kyle? More or less. Grew up on a ranch, fought in the war, went back to ranching after. The war, Sarah asked. You fought for the Confederacy. Kyle set down his coffee cup. I fought because Texas told me to. Never owned slaves, never wanted to. Lost 3 years of my life and came home to find my parents dead from fever and the ranch sold for taxes. Sarah regretted her question. I'm sorry, Kyle shrugged. Long time ago now. He paused. What about you? You're not from around here originally. Missouri, Sarah replied. My family had a farm there. I came west with Thomas after we married. He had big dreams about Arizona territory. And now he's gone, Kyle stated. Why? Sarah stiffened. That's rather personal, Mr. Lawson, Kyle, he corrected. And if I'm going to work for you, I should know what I'm getting into. Men don't usually abandon profitable ranches. Sarah considered lying, but what was the point? The truth would come out eventually in a town like Copper Springs. I can't have children, she said, the words still bitter in her mouth. Thomas wanted sons. When the doctor confirmed what we suspected after my second miscarriage, Thomas decided to try his luck elsewhere. Kyle's expression didn't change. That's rough. Yes, Sarah agreed, expecting further comment, but Kyle simply returned to his meal. The next day, Kyle rode into town and returned with his belongings: a rifle, a saddle, and a single satchel of personal items. Sarah wondered at a man who could fit his life into such a small space but didn't ask. The first weeks established a routine. Kyle rose before dawn to tend to the animals while Sarah prepared breakfast. They would work separately through the morning, Kyle mending fences or clearing brush, Sarah managing the house and garden. They would meet for a midday meal, discuss what needed to be done in the afternoon, then go their separate ways until supper. Kyle was a hard worker, Sarah had to admit. Within 2 weeks, he had repaired all the fence lines, cleaned out the barn, and even fixed the leaking roof on the house. He was quiet but respectful, never questioning Sarah's authority over her property, but offering suggestions when he saw room for improvement. One evening, about a month after Kyle's arrival, Sarah watched from the porch as he examined one of the cows. "She's pregnant," Kyle called over his shoulder. Sarah joined him in the pen. "Are you certain?" "Pretty sure. Should calve in early spring if my guess is right." Sarah felt a spark of hope. "That's good news." Kyle straightened up. "We need a bull if you want more calves." "I can't afford a bull." "Don't need to buy one," Kyle said. "Jefferson's ranch 5 miles east has 2. I rode by there yesterday. He might be willing to let us use one for stud fees." Sarah considered this. "I'll go speak with him tomorrow." "Already did," Kyle said. He agreed to $10 for his bull's services. Sarah frowned. "You went behind my back, just asking questions," Kyle replied. "Told him I'd have to check with you first." Sarah's irritation faded. "I appreciate your initiative, but please consult me before making such inquiries in the future. This is still my ranch," Kyle nodded. "Fair enough." The next day, they took the wagon to Jefferson's ranch. The bull service went smoothly, and by the time they headed home, there was potential for 3 more calves come spring. As autumn progressed, Sarah found herself growing comfortable with Kyle's presence. He never intruded on her personal space, always knocking before entering the house and keeping his distance during conversations. Yet there was something reassuring about having him around, knowing someone else was invested in the ranch's success. One night, as the first chill of approaching winter crept across the desert, Sarah sat on the porch darning socks. Kyle emerged from his cabin and approached, carrying 2 cups. "Coffee," he offered, extending one to her. Sarah accepted with surprise. "Thank you." Kyle sat on the steps, keeping a respectful distance. "Looks like we might get frost tonight." "The garden's mostly done anyway," Sarah replied. "I picked the last of the tomatoes this morning." They sat in companionable silence, sipping their coffee and watching stars appear in the darkening sky. "Can I ask you something?" Kyle finally said. "Of course." "Why are you fighting so hard for this place? It's not exactly prime ranching land." Sarah considered his question. "It's mine," she said simply, "or it will be once the bank loan is paid off. In Missouri, I owned nothing. Everything belonged to my father, then to Thomas. This is the first thing that's truly mine." Kyle nodded slowly. "I understand that. What about you?" Sarah asked. "Why Montana?" Kyle gazed into the darkness. "Open country, fewer people. More opportunity for a man to build something without someone looking over his shoulder." "Is that what you want, to build something?" "Used to," Kyle admitted. "After the war, I just wanted to keep moving. Seemed easier than staying put. And now," Kyle shrugged, "don't know anymore." The conversation shifted to more practical matters: winter preparations, feed storage, repairs that needed completing before the weather turned. As they talked, Sarah realized this was the longest conversation they'd had since Kyle arrived. The first winter storm caught them by surprise in late November. What started as light flurries turned into a blinding snowstorm by afternoon. Kyle and Sarah worked frantically to bring the livestock into the barn, fighting against wind that cut like a knife. "That's the last one." Kyle shouted over the wind as they herded the final cow into the barn. "We need to get inside," Sarah called back, her words nearly lost in the howling storm. They struggled toward the house, the snow already ankle-deep. Inside, Sarah's hands shook as she lit the lamps and stoked the fire. Kyle stomped snow from his boots by the door. "Your cabin," Sarah began. "Too far in this," Kyle interrupted. "If it's all the same to you, I'll sleep by the fire tonight." Sarah nodded, propriety giving way to practicality. "Of course, I'll make some hot food." They ate beans and cornbread in silence, both exhausted from the day's work. Sarah noticed Kyle wincing as he rotated his shoulder. "Are you hurt?" she asked. "Old war injury," he explained. "Axe up in cold weather." Without thinking, Sarah moved behind his chair. "May I?" Kyle hesitated, then nodded. Sarah placed her hands on his shoulders, feeling the knot of tension beneath her fingers. Slowly, she began to massage the area, working the stiffness from his muscles. "My father had similar problems," she explained, aware of the impropriety but continuing nonetheless. "This used to help him." Kyle remained silent, but she felt him gradually relax under her touch. When she finally stepped away, there was an unfamiliar tension in the air between them. "Thank you," Kyle said, his voice rough. "You're welcome," Sarah replied, moving quickly to clear the dishes. "I'll get you some blankets for the night." Sarah retreated to her bedroom earlier than usual, confused by her reaction to the simple act of touching Kyle's shoulders. It had been so long since she'd had physical contact with another person that even this innocent gesture had left her flustered. The storm lasted 3 days, confining them to the house. They established careful boundaries, Sarah cooking and sewing while Kyle repaired tools and read a dog-eared copy of The Last of the Mohicans he'd pulled from his satchel. They spoke only of practical matters, both seemingly aware of the strange intimacy created by their forced proximity. When the storm finally broke, Kyle returned to his cabin without comment, and their routine resumed. But something had shifted between them, a new awareness that neither acknowledged openly. December brought more snow and the approach of Christmas. Sarah found herself wondering if Kyle had plans to leave once spring arrived. The thought troubled her more than she cared to admit. One afternoon, Sarah returned from gathering eggs to find Kyle's horse gone. On the kitchen table was a note. "Gone to town for supplies, back by supper." When Kyle returned, his saddlebags were full. Among the practical items, coffee, sugar, ammunition, was a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Christmas is next week," he said awkwardly, handing it to her. Sarah unwrapped the package to find a beautiful bone comb for her hair. "Kyle, this is lovely, but you shouldn't have spent your wages on wanted to," he interrupted. "You've been fair to me, more than fair." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. It was the first gift she'd received since Thomas left. "Thank you, I didn't get you anything?" "Don't need anything," Kyle assured her. That evening, Sarah found herself studying Kyle as he cleaned his rifle by the fire. In the 4 months since he'd arrived, he'd transformed from a stranger into someone she trusted implicitly. She realized with a start that she knew very little about his past beyond the few details he'd shared. "You have family somewhere?" she asked suddenly. Kyle looked up from his work. "Not anymore. Parents died during the war, as I told you. No siblings. No wife, children," Sarah pressed. Kyle's expression closed slightly. "Was engaged once before the war. She married someone else while I was fighting. Can't blame her. 3 years is a long time to wait, and nobody knew if I was coming back." "I'm sorry," Sarah said softly. Kyle shrugged. "For the best, I came back different. Doubt we'd have suited anymore." Sarah understood that all too well. War changed men. Her own father had never been the same after returning from the Mexican-American War, prone to dark moods and nightmares that made him cry out in his sleep. "What about you?" Kyle asked. "Any family back in Missouri?" "A sister in St. Louis," Sarah replied. "We write occasionally." "My parents are gone. No children with your husband before." Kyle trailed off. "Before we discovered I couldn't have them. No, 2 miscarriages, both early." Sarah's voice was steady, but the pain was still there, buried beneath matter-of-fact words. Kyle was quiet for a moment. "Some men put too much stock in blood. A child is a child." Sarah looked at him curiously. "What do you mean?" "My mother couldn't have children either," Kyle explained. "My parents adopted me when I was 4. My birth parents died in a cholera outbreak. Never once felt like anything but their son." Sarah hadn't expected this revelation. "I didn't know." "No reason you should," Kyle replied. "Just saying your husband was a fool to leave over something like that." The comment hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning neither was ready to acknowledge. Christmas Day arrived with clear skies and brilliant sunshine reflecting off the snow. Sarah woke early to prepare a special breakfast, using precious ingredients she'd been saving for the occasion. When Kyle knocked on the door, she called for him to enter. His eyes widened at the sight of fresh biscuits, bacon, and even a small jar of preserved peaches Sarah had been hiding away. "This is quite a spread." "Merry Christmas," Sarah said, gesturing for him to sit. After breakfast, Sarah hesitantly handed Kyle a package. "It's not much," she apologized. Kyle unwrapped it to find a new woolen scarf, clearly handmade. "When did you have time to knit this?" "While you were sleeping," Sarah replied. "It gets cold in Montana from what I hear." Something flickered across Kyle's face, surprise perhaps, or something deeper. "Thank you," he said, wrapping it around his neck. "It's perfect." They spent the day in unusual leisure, Sarah reading while Kyle whittled by the fire. For dinner they roasted a chicken Sarah had been saving, along with potatoes and carrots from the root cellar. As they ate, Sarah found herself wondering if this would be their only Christmas together. "I've been thinking," Kyle said abruptly, setting down his fork. Sarah looked up, feeling a flutter of apprehension. "About spring calving, we should build a separate pen for the pregnant cows. Somewhere sheltered." Relief mingled with disappointment. "Yes, that's a good idea. And I was wondering if you'd be willing to invest in a few more cattle come spring," Kyle continued. "Prices will be good after winter, and with the arrangements we've made with Jefferson's bull, we could double the herd in a couple of years." Sarah studied him. "That sounds like a longer-term plan than your Montana ambitions would allow." Kyle met her gaze steadily. "Been reconsidering those ambitions." Sarah's heart quickened. "Oh, this is good land," Kyle said. "With work, it could be a proper ranch. Seems a shame to walk away from that potential." "And that's all it is, potential you see in the land?" Sarah asked, hardly daring to breathe. Kyle's gaze didn't waver. "No, that's not all." Neither spoke for a long moment. "I should be clear," Sarah finally said. "If you're reconsidering your plans because of other considerations, nothing has changed about my situation. I still can't have children." "I heard you the first time," Kyle replied. "I ain't after that." Sarah blinked, startled by his directness. "Then what are you after, Mr. Lawson?" "Partnership," he said simply. "Of whatever kind you might be willing to offer." The air between them seemed to crackle with possibility. Sarah had not considered remarriage since Thomas left, had, in fact, sworn never to put herself in such a vulnerable position again. Yet here was Kyle, offering something she hadn't realized she wanted until this moment. "I need time to think," she said honestly. Kyle nodded. "Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." The weeks following Christmas brought a new awareness to their interactions. Hands brushed while passing tools, eyes held contact a moment longer than necessary, conversations stretched into the evening hours. Neither pushed for resolution of what Kyle had proposed, but it hung between them, a promise waiting to be fulfilled or withdrawn. Winter slowly released its grip on the land. By early March, green shoots appeared in the garden, and the pregnant cows grew heavy with their coming calves. Kyle built the sheltered pen he'd proposed, working from sunrise to sunset to ensure it would be ready. The first calf arrived during a gentle spring rain. Sarah and Kyle worked together through the night, helping the mother through a difficult birth. When the wobbly-legged calf finally stood and found its mother's milk, they sat back against the barn wall, exhausted and exhilarated. "We did it," Sarah said, wiping sweat from her brow. Kyle looked at her, really looked at her, taking in her disheveled hair and dirt-streaked face. "You're beautiful," he said unexpectedly. Sarah laughed, gesturing to her appearance. "I'm a mess." "Most beautiful mess I've ever seen," Kyle insisted, and then he was leaning toward her, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. She didn't want to. Their first kiss was gentle, questioning. Their second was not. Months of unspoken desire rushed to the surface as Kyle's arms encircled her waist and Sarah's hands found their way into his hair. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily. "I've been thinking about your offer," Sarah whispered. "About partnership?" And Kyle's voice was rough with emotion. "I accept," Sarah said, "but I need you to understand something first. I'm not the same woman I was with Thomas. I won't be controlled or abandoned again." "I don't want to control you," Kyle replied, "and I sure as hell don't plan on leaving." Then I think we might have the beginnings of a good partnership, Mr. Lawson. Kyle smiled, the first full smile Sarah had seen from him. I believe we do, Mrs. Hayes. They married in April, a simple ceremony in the Copper Springs church with only a handful of witnesses. Walter Jenkins from the general store stood up for Kyle, while Mrs. Dunning from the boarding house attended Sarah. There was no elaborate celebration afterward, just a quiet meal at the ranch and the promise of a shared future. That night, as they lay together in what was now their bed, Sarah confessed her fears. I'm afraid I'll disappoint you, she whispered into the darkness. That someday you'll want what I can't give you. Kyle propped himself up on one elbow, his face visible in the moonlight streaming through the window. Sarah, I meant what I said. I don't need children of my own blood to be happy. If we decide we want children, there are plenty in this world who need homes. Like you did, Sarah said, touching his face. Like I did, Kyle agreed, and I got lucky. I'd like to pass that luck on someday if you're willing. Sarah felt something heal inside her, a wound she had carried since the doctor's pronouncement and Thomas's subsequent abandonment. I'd like that, she whispered. By summer, the Double H Ranch was showing signs of prosperity. 2 more calves had been born, the garden was thriving, and Kyle had added a new room to the house. Sarah found herself singing as she worked, something she hadn't done since before her first miscarriage. One hot July afternoon, a rider approached the ranch. Sarah was hanging laundry while Kyle repaired a wagon wheel nearby. Both straightened as the horse and rider came into view. Do you know him? Kyle asked, reaching casually for the rifle propped against the porch. Sarah shielded her eyes against the sun. No, I don't think, she broke off as the rider came closer. It's Thomas. Kyle's expression hardened. What would he be doing here? I don't know, Sarah replied, her stomach churning. Thomas Hayes looked much the same as when he'd left nearly a year before, perhaps a bit thinner and more weathered. He reined in his horse and dismounted, approaching with the confident stride of a man who still believed he owned the place. Sarah, he called, you're looking well. Sarah felt Kyle move to stand beside her. What do you want, Thomas? Thomas's gaze flicked to Kyle, then back to Sarah. Can we speak privately? Anything you have to say can be said in front of my husband, Sarah replied firmly. Thomas's eyebrows shot up. Husband. Well, you didn't waste any time, did you? State your business or leave, Kyle said, his voice level but with steel underneath. Thomas raised his hands in a placating gesture. I just came to talk. Things didn't work out in California like I hoped. Got to thinking about this place, about the investment I put into it. You abandoned this property and your wife, Kyle stated. You have no claim here anymore. Thomas's expression hardened. That's not for you to decide, Cowboy. This was my land which you left, Sarah interrupted. Along with unpaid banknotes that I've been covering. The deed is in my name now. You couldn't have paid those notes on your own, Thomas scoffed. She didn't have to, Kyle said. We've been building this place together, the bank's been paid, and there's nothing here for you anymore. Thomas looked between them, calculation in his eyes. I could contest this in court. A husband has rights, ex-husband, Sarah corrected. The divorce papers were finalized 3 months after you left. I have the documentation inside if you'd like to see it. Thomas's face flushed with anger. You had no right. She had every right, Kyle interrupted, taking a step forward. Now, I suggest you get back on that horse and ride away. There's nothing for you here. For a moment, it seemed Thomas might argue further, but something in Kyle's steady gaze made him reconsider. Keep the worthless dirt, he finally spat. You're welcome to her too. Barren women make poor wives anyway. Kyle moved so quickly Sarah barely saw it happen. One moment Thomas was sneering, the next he was on the ground, Kyle standing over him. Don't you ever speak about my wife that way again, Kyle said quietly. Now get on your horse and don't come back. Thomas scrambled to his feet, hand hovering near his gun. I wouldn't, Kyle advised. I'm a better shot than I am a fighter, and that's saying something. Thomas glared at them both, then mounted his horse and rode away without another word. When the dust from his departure had settled, Sarah released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. I'm sorry about that. Kyle turned to her, concern replacing anger. You have nothing to apologize for. I should have told you about the divorce papers, Sarah said. I filed them in town before you arrived, it just never seemed important to mention. Kyle smiled slightly. Well, I'm glad you did. Saves us the trouble of shooting him. Sarah laughed despite herself, feeling the tension drain away. Thank you for defending me. Kyle took her hand. Always will. That night they sat on the porch watching stars appear in the velvet sky. Sarah leaned against Kyle's shoulder, content in a way she had never expected to feel again after Thomas left. I've been thinking, Kyle said, breaking the comfortable silence. A dangerous pastime, Sarah teased. Maybe, Kyle agreed with a smile, but hear me out. What would you think about turning part of the ranch into a way station? We're well positioned between Copper Springs and Tucson. Could offer meals, fresh horses, maybe rooms for travelers to rest. Sarah sat up straight, considering the idea. That would mean building on to the house. It would, Kyle nodded. But with the copper mine bringing more people to the area, there's going to be more traffic through these parts. Could be good business. It would also mean more people around, Sarah said thoughtfully. If we're thinking about adopting someday, that might be nice for a child not to be so isolated. Kyle squeezed her hand. That's what I was thinking too. Over the next year, the Double H Ranch transformed. Kyle and hired hands from town built a 2-room addition to the house, creating space for travelers to stay. Sarah planted an expanded garden and set up a proper kitchen for serving meals. They added to their cattle herd and began breeding horses as well. Word spread about the Hayes Way station, and soon they had regular business from travelers, mail carriers, and merchants moving between towns. Sarah enjoyed the company and the chance to hear news from beyond their small corner of the territory. In the fall of 1877, Kyle returned from a trip to Tucson with more than just the supplies he'd gone to purchase. Sarah was in the front yard when the wagon approached, and at first she thought her eyes were playing tricks on her. Beside Kyle on the wagon seat sat a small figure. As they drew closer, Sarah could see it was a girl of about 6 years with dark hair and solemn eyes. She clutched a small cloth doll and watched Sarah warily as Kyle brought the wagon to a stop. Sarah, Kyle called, his voice betraying nervous excitement, there's someone I'd like you to meet. Sarah approached the wagon as Kyle helped the child down. Up close, she could see the girl was thin, her simple dress clean but worn. This is Lily, Kyle said gently. Lily, this is my wife, Mrs. Hayes. The child gave a small curtsy. Madam, Sarah knelt to be at eye level with the girl. Hello, Lily, it's very nice to meet you. Kyle cleared his throat. Lily's parents were killed in a raid near the border 2 months ago. She's been at the mission in Tucson since then. When I stopped there for supplies, the sisters mentioned they were struggling to find homes for several orphans. Sarah's heart quickened as she understood what Kyle was proposing. I see. I told them we might be able to give Lily a home, but that I needed to speak with you first, Kyle continued. The sisters agreed to let her come with me for a visit while we decide. Sarah looked from Kyle to the solemn-faced child. Would you like something to eat, Lily? I just baked some biscuits this morning. The girl nodded shyly. Yes, madam. Come inside then, Sarah said, standing and offering her hand. After a moment's hesitation, Lily took it. Later that night, with Lily asleep in the spare room, Sarah and Kyle sat by the fire. I should have sent word first, Kyle admitted. It was impulsive. Yes, it was, Sarah agreed, but I understand why you did it. Do you? Kyle asked. Because when I saw her sitting there, so quiet and alone, all I could think about was how you and I could give her a good life. Sarah reached for his hand. I've been thinking the same thing since the moment you introduced us. Kyle's expression lifted. I mean I think Lily needs a home and we have one to offer, Sarah said. If she's comfortable with us and if she wants to stay, then yes, let's make her our daughter. Kyle gathered Sarah into his arms, holding her tightly. Thank you, he whispered against her hair. For what? Sarah asked, pulling back to look at him. For building this life with me, Kyle replied. For taking a chance on a drifting cowboy who wasn't sure what he wanted until he found you. We built it together, Sarah reminded him. Partners, remember. Lily adapted quickly to life at the Double H Ranch. Within weeks, her solemn demeanor gave way to childish curiosity and occasional bursts of laughter that filled the house with joy. Sarah taught her to read and cook, while Kyle showed her how to ride and care for animals. By Christmas, the adoption was official. Lily Hayes Lawson was legally their daughter. As the ranch and way station prospered, Sarah and Kyle continued to open their home to children in need. 2 years after Lily's arrival, they adopted twin boys Matthew and Mark, whose parents had died of fever in a mining camp. A year later came Emma, abandoned as an infant on the church steps in Copper Springs. By 1880, the Double H Ranch was home to 4 children, 25 cattle, a dozen horses, and a thriving way station business that had become known throughout the territory for its hospitality and good food. On the 5th anniversary of their marriage, Kyle and Sarah stood on their porch watching their children play in the yard. Lily, now 11, was teaching 8-year-old Emma how to jump rope, while the 9-year-old twins raced stick horses around the barn. Did you ever imagine this? Sarah asked, leaning against her husband's shoulder. Kyle slipped an arm around her waist. Not when I first rode into Copper Springs, that's for certain. I was just passing through, remember? Best detour you ever took, Sarah teased. Best decision I ever made was saying yes to a determined woman with a run-down ranch and big dreams, Kyle corrected, pressing a kiss to her temple. Sarah watched as Lily caught sight of them and waved enthusiastically. I thought my life was over when Thomas left, she admitted. I thought that without the ability to have children, I'd never have a family. And now look at us, Kyle said, gesturing to their home and the children playing in the yard. 4 kids, a growing business, and the prettiest wife in the territory. I'd say we did all right. Sarah turned in his arms to face him. We did more than all right. We created something beautiful, Kyle, something neither of us could have built alone. Partnership, Kyle said, echoing the word he'd used years ago when first proposing a future together. Partnership, Sarah agreed, standing on tiptoe to kiss him as the Arizona sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. And the sounds of their children's laughter carried on the evening breeze the perfect harmony to the love story neither of them had expected to find.